Hey everyone, welcome back to the layout once again. It's been way too long since the last update, but you'll be pleased to know, I think, that in my absence I actually have gotten some work done on the layout, and if you look over to the left-hand side here on the lower level, you'll see that this scene over here, in what I can now officially call Conkelley, Montana, is starting to take shape. So let's talk about what's going on over here, and I'll try to paint a picture of what this will eventually look like. So, if you guys would, please do me a favor and ignore the disgusting mess on the floor. I did not take the time to clean that up, obviously, but that's not why we're looking at the ground right now. What I'm trying to show you is that off to the left we have our yard, and I'm just trying to orient everyone. I know some of you probably already know sort of the layout geographically on the Plains Division, but some of you might not. So, on the lower level, we have Whitefish, Montana. That's over here on the left. So that's our yard. And the lower level is more or less representative of sort of the western approach of Marias Pass, which is the Highline subdivision. So this is the far western edge of the Highline sub, with the, just like the prototype, the westernmost portion being Whitefish Yard over here on the left. So then on the prototype, a few miles down the road, or up the road I should say, since they're heading upgrade, is a place called Columbia Falls, and that's what we're modeling over here on the lower level with our industrial area laid out over here. Some of you might notice that I've made some changes down here on this end. We'll probably take a look at that at the end of this video, but my point is not to look at that right now, but to show you that once we leave Whitefish, we quickly come to the town of Columbia Falls, where we have some switching over here. And then we round the corner, and we're back in the aisleway that we started with, right? We have Whitefish over here on the bottom left, and then this is sort of the last scene on the lower level, off to the right, before we leave Montana, and when we pop back out into the layout room, which is sort of up over here, we're now on the upper level, and that's our Nebraska scenery. So there's really three main scenes on the lower level: Whitefish, Columbia Falls, and now the scene that you're looking at over here on the right, this is a place called Conkelley, Montana, which on the prototype is just another few miles up the grade from Columbia Falls that we just took a look at. And for the longest time, I had wondered, what am I going to do with this scene over here? I didn't know if I was going to put an industry, and then at some point I decided, no, I think I just want this to be some sort of pure scenery, just to give us some interesting, straight main line running through some interesting scenery. And I came across a place called Bad Rock Canyon. So Conkelley is the actual railroad town or railroad name on a map. About a half-mile east of that is a place called Bad Rock Canyon, and we're not really into the thick of things on Marias Pass yet. So we're not in sort of the dramatic mountainous scenery with snow sheds and tunnels that people associate with Marias Pass. But we get a little sample of it here, sort of between Columbia Falls and West Glacier. And West Glacier is what I consider to be sort of the beginning of the Marias Pass ascent, or like the real scenery that people think about. But what we have here is a really interesting sort of pocket of scenery. And as I mentioned, it's a place called Bad Rock Canyon because, as you'll see in some photos, there's this pretty sheer canyon wall that the railroad tracks as it follows the Middle Fork Flathead River. And it's not a very long canyon. It's a pretty short little stretch, but it has some cool features. Notably, and I already said this, is just like the sheer rise of the cliffs or the canyon in some places, as well as a tunnel, which is a pretty cool feature to add. And you'll see that I've started to model that, or I've at least placed it down there at that end of the scene. Now, I don't want to over-explain what's going on here because you guys are capable of using your eyeballs, and it's definitely my nature to go into too much detail. So if you guys have questions, of course, shoot those my way. But I do want to point out a couple of features. First thing you'll notice in the scene is that we've got a river down here, and this is supposed to represent the Middle Fork Flathead River. And of course, going over that river is a bridge. So this is a really cool feature that I'm pretty excited about. I've never had a bridge on the layout. I knew this bridge would go somewhere at some point, but we didn't really figure it out until recently. So this is going to be I think, a cool scene. The bridge itself is inspired by the bridge at Index, Washington, which you're thinking, that's weird. I thought we're in Montana, and we are in Montana, but for the longest time we've had this bridge kit, and I noticed on one of my railfan trips a few years ago that it looks remarkably like the bridge at Index, Washington, and then recently I found some photos of that bridge and realized that it has a pretty unique setup on the top side. And if we look at some photos, you'll see that the bridge itself doesn't use bridge track like we're used to. It has sort of a modified deck plate where you have sort of this steel plate running atop some pretty heavy-duty cross members that you can kind of see right there. And then on top of that steel plate is the track, and it's just sort of normal track. There's no bridge ties or anything like that. And then it's ballasted, which is kind of weird. And then on either side we have some wooden planks as a walkway, and that's fairly standard stuff. You'll see on my model we don't yet have the handrails installed, but eventually those will attach to those cross members. And you'll see there's that deck just sort of sitting on top of the main girder, and you can see daylight through there. So to my knowledge, that's sort of how the real bridge is set up, and that's where I took my inspiration from. It's not prototypical for this particular geographic location, but I think it's going to be a sort of a point of interest, and it'll look pretty cool once it's all detailed and weathered up. So that's that. Then we cross the Flathead River, we snake our way this way, and you'll see that now the scenery's dropping off and down and away from the tracks, the implication being it's sloping down towards the river. And then in the background, between the tracks and the backdrop, we'll have our nice rock canyon wall. Moving up this way, then we have a tunnel. This is going to be as prototypical as I can make it, because there actually is a tunnel. Unlike the bridge, there actually is a tunnel at Bad Rock Canyon. I believe, and I'm sort of blanking on the details right now, I believe this is tunnel 5.0. It's a pretty short span, and I think that'll look pretty cool right here. I just sort of like the perspective, right? You could stand here, get some pretty cool rail fanning shots of a train on either side of the tunnel as it rounds the curve down here. And then just to the left, or on my layout to the east of this tunnel, is a unique retaining wall. So I'm not really going to do it justice here because I don't think we have the space to do it. So it's going to be kind of scaled down. It's going to be quite a bit smaller than the real one. But on the real Bad Rock Canyon, there's a pretty cool retaining wall that's all graffitied up. So I'm going to try to model that here. And then the tracks curve off around the corner. And this perspective right here is actually pretty realistic if you ignore the fact that the sort of cardinal directions are inverted here. So we're climbing east just like the prototype does, except the scenery as you see it here is sort of a mirror image, where on the prototype this would be downgrade. It's actually heading upgrade here. So you kind of have to ignore that, but I'm more going for the visual effect rather than being absolutely prototypically accurate. And on that note, one thing that I've sort of inserted into the scene, which isn't from the prototype, is a road here. And I guess maybe I'm simulating Highway 2, but this, yeah, again, this is sort of a vestige from my rail fanning experiences. I think a lot about how I'm going to put scenes together based on what I've seen and what I've experienced. So I really wanted to have this road here. Plus, I think it'll be kind of a cool perspective. You'll see how it sort of slopes down and away from the tracks. It crests up there at the top of the hill and then curves left into the backdrop. And this will provide us a little location. You'll see sort of where that SUV is sitting. That, if you look at the dotted lines, that'll be sort of the edge of the road, and we could have a little gravel lot there for crew changes or whatever we want to simulate. And then once again, off to the left, we have the Flathead River. So now we've jumped back once again to Columbia Falls. We're just on the other side of the backdrop from the Bad Rock Canyon scene. And as we pan this way, some of you might notice that things look fairly different here. And I don't want to go into too much detail because I don't have a lot to demonstrate here. More explanation, and I know that's not fun to listen to, but really quick, just because I want some of your opinions if you have them to give. I want to explain what's going on here. For those of you who followed for a while, you might remember that back in this corner we had some scenery fairly built up. You'll see I have ripped all of that out. You can kind of see on the wall where that was. We had a retaining wall on the outside of the curve, and then the scenery was built up into the corner. And then where this hole in the backdrop is now, and remember this backdrop panel wasn't even in last time, this is just getting fitted right now, we had a tunnel right here where the fascia came up in the front and then hid all of that going on back there. Now the reason for all of that initially is that we have our main line out front, there's a siding in the back here, and then there's a turnout right here that splits off and then goes into the staging room back that way. And this is supposed to represent the Kalispell subdivision that shoots off to the southwest at Columbia Falls on the prototype. Of course, on my layout, as I said, it's just a reverse loop. But it enters the backdrop at such a shallow angle. And the reason the backdrop has to follow this contour here is because on just the other side of this hardboard panel is the main line. It's the same main line you see right here, but it's almost looped over itself. And this is the scene, as I mentioned, this is just out of sight from the big curve where that retaining wall is over at Bad Rock Canyon. So I've changed my mind once again, and I think I am going to do a backdrop without a tunnel covering all of this, without the scenery built up in the corner. And here's what I'm thinking, and let me know what you guys think. So you'll see, because it enters the backdrop at such a shallow angle, we have this huge cutout in the hardboard, and it's kind of awkward, and I want to hide that somehow. And not only is it wide, but it's pretty close to our tracks here, which is an issue. So because Columbia Falls is an industrial area and it's got some weird geometry to it and some pretty interesting buildings, I think it's not too far out of the realm of possibility where you would have a single industrial complex of buildings with a walkway for mechanical equipment, or it could literally just be a walkway for people, or it could be like a conveyor belt or something like that. But you can sort of imagine what I'm talking about, where you have two industrial buildings and you have either, again, like pipes, conveyor belt, or a covered walkway for people going between them. So we'd have one backdrop flat-ish building here to hide this edge. So this would come up here and sort of turn into the corner of the backdrop. Of course, it won't be this building. I've hijacked this from to the left of you guys. And then imagine a similar building, but over on this corner, hiding this edge. And then, as I've alluded to, there will be something connecting the two buildings that'll hide this upper edge. Is it overkill? Maybe, but I think it could work. So let me know what you guys think, if you have any suggestions to sort of hide the awkwardness that's going on here. You'll also have to remember that we have a fair bit of space to play with out here, so there will be trees intended to block that view as much as possible. Alright, so the last thing I want to share with you guys is a new locomotive pickup. This is an Athearn Genesis GP38-2. It does not have sound, but I conveniently had an extra Digitrax decoder laying around, which made this pickup pretty cheap. And this is not exactly what's roaming the yard at Whitefish on the prototype right now, but I got it because it's pretty close. I think for the past few years now, Whitefish Yard has used a pairing of GP39-3s. Of course, this is a GP38-2, and these are still non-turbocharged, whereas the 39-3s are turbocharged. So they would have a slightly different sound, but it's still a cool model, and I'm hoping soon to pick up another, which would really complete the set, and I think would be a great look for our yard here at Whitefish. And once again, really place this scene on a map, because if anyone's familiar with Whitefish Yard, especially right now, this is definitely the look of the yard power that they use. Well everyone, I think that's all I've got for this layout update. I hope to have just as much for the next update. And if you have any questions, as always, leave those below. Comments, suggestions, excuse me, all that good stuff, and I will try to respond to each and every one of you. But that's it for this video. So as always, thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned, and I will see you next time.